Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today we're unpacking a really, truly unprecedented chain of events. For 47 years, we've heard constant revolutionary rhetoric out of Iran, right? Promises of this unbreakable resistance economy. Decades of sanctions, embargoes, UN resolutions, they all came and went. But then, reality hit. Hard. In the span of just 18 days, a United States naval blockade essentially found the ultimate pressure point and triggered a massive multi-front economic collapse. We're going to dig into the exact numbers, the satellite data, and even some leaked internal memos to see exactly how this domino effect played out.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because 12 to 22 is the terrifying ticking clock of this entire crisis. We're talking about the exact number of days Iran has left for unused crude oil storage. And look, this isn't just some rough estimate. This comes straight from Kepler. They're a maritime intelligence firm, and their satellite data tracks every single tanker and storage tank with pinpoint precision. They are looking at the actual physical fill levels. The issue is, the oil wells are still pumping, but the tankers, they're completely blocked. So in just 12 to 22 days, those tanks are going to hit 100% capacity with literally nowhere for that crude to go.
Now, contrast those 47 years of defiant rhetoric with how shockingly fast this timeline actually moved. Look at March 2026. Iran is comfortably exporting about 1.85 million barrels of crude every single day. Then, boom, April 13th, the US naval blockade officially begins. Just 6 days later, April 19th, the USS Spruance fires on the Tuska in the Gulf of Oman, strictly enforcing that blockade. By April 25th, the economic squeeze is already so bad that President Pezeshkian has to get on national TV and beg citizens to conserve energy. And then, April 27th, a highly classified security memo leaks. In exactly 2 weeks, the regime's singular critical revenue artery was brought to a complete and staggering halt.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this drop-off, let's look at the math. Pre-war, they were outputting around 3.3 million barrels a day. By March 2026, exports were sitting at 1.85 million, but by late April, those exports cratered to just 567,000 barrels a day. Guys, that's a 70% collapse. 70%! And the physics of this are just brutal. You have these massive underground wells still churning millions of barrels into a system that is totally jammed up. Goldman Sachs actually estimated that Iran had to curtail 2.5 million barrels of daily production. You see, the storage infrastructure was designed to flow through to tankers, not to act as some permanent parking garage. Once those tankers stop moving, the entire system mathematically seizes up.
So what exactly happens when that 12 to 22-day clock runs out and the system seizes? Well, it brings us to a really fascinating, honestly kind of devastating petroleum engineering concept called water coning. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently called the Iranian oil wells fragile, and this physical mechanic is exactly what he was neutrally decoding. When a well is forced into an emergency shut-in because the oil has nowhere to go, the underground reservoir pressure totally changes. The water table, which naturally sits underneath the oil, starts getting sucked upward into the producing zone. And here's the kicker, it's completely irreversible. When you finally go to turn that well back on, you're pumping more water and way less oil. The well's actual productive capacity is permanently degraded.
And that permanent geological damage? It comes with a massive permanent price tag. The Foundation for Defensive Democracies ran the numbers, and they estimate this forced mass shut-in is going to cause a production loss of 300,000 to 500,000 barrels every single day forever. If you translate that into dollars, we're talking about a $9 billion to $15 billion loss every single year. Let that sink in. This isn't just a temporary hiccup while the blockade is active. It means that whenever this conflict ends, regardless of what diplomatic deals are struck, that money is permanently erased from their economy. You just can't undo the geological damage to those wells. This physical bottleneck almost immediately started knocking over geopolitical dominoes. For years, experts have asked, hey, what happens if the Strait of Hormuz gets closed? And Iran's answer was always Chabahar Port. Located way out in the Gulf of Oman, it was their ultimate strategic backup plan. Plan A was this grand gateway for international transport, totally bypassing Hormuz. But because the US Navy stretched its blockade enforcement far beyond Hormuz, all the way into the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, Plan B is the reality today. It's turned into a giant maritime parking lot. A port that usually handles maybe 5 moored ships at a time now has over 20 stranded supertankers just jammed in there waiting.
And this paralysis at Chabahar has a really brutal secondary effect. India had spent years and a lot of capital developing Chabahar. Their involvement essentially gave the port its geopolitical legitimacy. But with everything frozen, India's investment just hit a brick wall. In fact, reporting confirms India has actually signed a brand new contract using the UAE's Fujairah port infrastructure instead. They are pivoting entirely away from Chabahar. Basically, the geopolitical cost of being associated with Iran right now is just way higher than any benefit Chabahar was supposed to offer. So Iran didn't just lose a functional port, they lost a massive international partner that made it legitimate in the first place.
Now, what's really interesting here is just how completely transparent the UAE was about all of this. Listen to this direct quote from the UAE's energy minister talking to CNN about their sudden exit from OPEC. He said, "The timing is right because the Strait of Hormuz is closed and the impact on the market will be limited." I mean, wow. The UAE did not quietly slip out the back door. They actively capitalized on the closed strait to leave OPEC at the exact moment it would cost them the least and benefit them the most. Because they have that pipeline to Fujairah that totally bypasses Hormuz, they can just keep right on pumping while Iran is completely boxed in.
This UAE exit is an absolute catastrophe for Iran's energy strategy. By leaving OPEC, the UAE doesn't have to follow quotas anymore, meaning they can pump an extra 1 million barrels a day into the market. Because of that, OPEC's total grip on global supply dropped from 30% down to 26%. So why does that crush Iran? Well, OPEC's strict production discipline is what kept global oil prices high. That meant even when Iran was selling sanctioned oil at a deep discount, they were still pulling in decent cash. But now, the UAE is flooding the market, driving global prices down at the exact same moment Iran's export volume is cratered by 70%. In the energy world, we call this a two-front loss. Your volume falls off a cliff, your price drops, and your revenue basically flatlines to zero.
Naturally, this extreme economic pressure is spiraling straight into a massive domestic crisis. On April 27th, a highly classified memo from Iran's Supreme National Security Council leaked to Iran International, and it paints an incredibly grim picture. Keep in mind, this is their own internal security assessment, and it does not pull punches. The council concluded that massive protests could erupt within days. They officially estimated the regime could only survive the blockade for maybe 6 to 8 weeks tops, and they projected that by the end of spring, a staggering 2 million private sector jobs would be completely wiped out.
I actually want to pause for a second and just read this quote directly from that leaked memo. It says, "Unrest is inevitable, only its timing is uncertain." Just think about the sheer bureaucratic bluntness of those words. This isn't an outside observer or a US intelligence agency guessing what might happen. This is the regime's very own internal security apparatus officially putting down on paper that their social contract is completely dissolving. And the timeline for that collapse? It's not being measured in years anymore. It's measured in mere weeks.
Let's take a second to ground all these huge macroeconomic forces into the actual human reality on the ground. To try and control the narrative, the regime triggered a massive 62-day internet blackout that affected 90 million Iranians and basically destroyed the digital economy that young entrepreneurs had built to survive all these sanctions. Government offices are slashed to half-day schedules. The president literally went on television to beg citizens to turn off their lights, to use 2 instead of 10, because they are actively cutting streetlights in major cities like Isfahan and Tehran. On top of that, imported medicine prices have shot up 60%, and the lines for basic food are just growing by the day.
And driving all of this crushing domestic pain is one truly staggering number: 500 million. According to White House officials, who confirmed this data to CNBC, $500 million is the amount of physical cash Iran is losing every single day strictly because of this naval blockade. $500 million a day. Do the math on that, and it's roughly $15 billion a month just vanishing from the regime's coffers. It is a scale of daily cash loss that is simply unmanageable.
So the crucial point is how all of this suddenly frozen oil revenue ripples out across the entire Middle East. Remember, the IRGC spent 40 years building this massive regional proxy network, and that network runs on hard cash. Well, suddenly the cash is gone. We're seeing reports that Hezbollah fighters aren't getting their salaries. Houthi forces down in Yemen are trying to operate with completely depleted drone stockpiles because there's no money for resupply. Iraqi Shia militias have actually had to pull back from their field operations because their operational budgets just dried up. This vast regional proxy network is literally being financially dismantled overnight, all as a direct result of the blockade strangling their treasury.
If you want to understand the regime's sheer desperation right now, just consider this detail. They actually went and reactivated the Nasha. Now, the Nasha is a 30-year-old scrapped oil tanker that literally should be sitting in a shipbreaker's yard in Bangladesh right now. But they dragged it back into service for one reason: to act as a giant floating storage unit for crude oil that has absolutely nowhere else to go. It is such a stark, physical reminder of that ticking clock we talked about at the very beginning. I mean, when you are dumping your country's primary export into a literal scrapyard shipyard vessel, the economic desperation is undeniable.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because according to the source material, this current situation simply cannot hold. The pressure is too high. There are really only 3 inevitable scenarios from here. Step 1, Iran totally backs down and accepts a new, comprehensive nuclear deal that meets all 5 red lines demanded by the US. Step 2, they try to resist, the 6 to 8 week timeline expires, and the massive domestic unrest their own memo predicted erupts into a full collapse. Or Step 3, things escalate drastically into direct military operations targeting the actual infrastructure. As all the sources point out, absolutely none of these paths offer a clean, simple outcome.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. The stakes of this blockade go so far beyond just one country. As this 12 to 22-day storage clock ticks down in real time, the entire global economy is watching. Brent crude oil is already pricing above $110 a barrel. So as this crisis accelerates toward one of those 3 highly volatile scenarios we just outlined, we really have to ask ourselves, is the global economy truly prepared for the unpriced fallout of this ticking clock? It's a massive, massive question. But understanding the domino effect we mapped out today, that is the absolutely crucial first step to finding the answer. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and I will catch you in the next one.